Welcome to the fourth episode in a Legendarium series about the witch trials. In part 4, Toil and Terrible Trouble, we will talk about how a second book about witchcraft helped to unleash a second wave of accusations and executions in the British Isles. All the while, the witchcraft hysteria continued to blaze in Europe. During the 1590s, King James VI of Scotland helped to unleash a wave of witch trials in his home country. In 1603, King James VI also became King James I of England. The English saw him as a man of great promise, with 2 heirs to assure a peaceful succession. King James had also written several books. To know their king better, the English began buying one of his books, Demonology, in great numbers. It opened with the lines, "The fearful abounding at this time in this country of these detestable slaves of the devil, the witches or enchanters, have moved me, beloved reader, to dispatch in post to publish this treatise in mind." Quite simply, James argued that witchcraft festered like a disease in the body politic. In a further reflection of how not everyone believed in witchcraft at the time, James organized his book as a dialogue between 2 men, Epistemon and Philomattheus. Epistemon, a rational man of great education, is a proxy for James himself. During the book, he convinces the doubting Philomattheus that witches exist, that they pose a grave threat to Christendom, and that anyone who doubts this is either a fool or an agent of the devil. Perhaps hoping to take advantage of the king's obsession, a wealthy notable named Brian Gunter secured an audience with King James in 1605. He reported that after reading King James' book, he realized that his daughter Anne had become bewitched. Brian blamed her violent fits, during which she supposedly vomited pins, on witchery. And very conveniently, Anne named the 3 witches responsible during her fits. King James regarded this accusation with doubt, and he ordered Anne to be inspected by the Archbishop of Canterbury, himself a skeptic on the witchcraft issue. It did not take the Archbishop long to determine that Anne had never been ill, and that Brian was trying to manipulate James into settling a score for him. Brian Gunter was duly fined. The Gunter episode seems very much at odds with the arch-witch hunter of the North Berwick trials just 15 years ago. In fact, King James fancied himself a legal scholar, and hoped to protect the innocent during the witch hunts. However, not all of King James' subjects shared this respect for the law or the rights of innocence. Indeed, events back on the continent showed that the witchcraft hysteria would follow the whims of local lords who could manipulate the masses. Once again, the horror unfolded in the supposedly Holy Roman Empire. There, Balthasar von Dernbach, the Prince Abbot of Fulda Monastery, came home after an exile of 20 years. He joined the Catholic Counter-Reformation in its campaign against Protestantism. To prove his loyalty to the Catholic Church, which backed him, and to the Jesuit order, Dernbach launched an aggressive investigation into sorcery to purge Fulda of what he called improper things. He used a tower as a prison, where guards freely beat prisoners and rats gnawed at the fingers and toes of half-conscious inmates. The most well-known victim became a pregnant woman named Murga Bien. Torturers forced her to confess to the murder of her second husband, their children, and even a family member of her husband's employer. Found guilty, Bien burned at the stake, along with 20 others. The witch hunts in Fulda ended with the death of Dernbach in 1605. But the witch hunts returned to England a few years later, in 1612. This time they struck in Pendle Hill, an impoverished and lawless region in Lancashire, where many took on the trades of begging and magical healing. Since women often worked these trades, they became prime targets for witch hunters. A local woman named Alison Device passed a local peddler on the road. She called to him, but the old man ignored her. Filled with anger, she cursed him. Not a minute later, the old man tumbled to the ground and began gasping and wheezing. By the time several local men brought him to a doctor, he could no longer move his left side and he lost the ability to speak. Modern medical science has little doubt that the old peddler suffered a stroke. However, in the mind of Alison Device, she had cursed him. Indeed, she came from a family of so-called cunning folk who used herbs and magic to cure illness, so she had much faith in the power of curses. Frantic, she reported to Roger Noel, the Justice of the Peace for Pendle Hill. She confessed to cursing the peddler, but went even further. She added to her story, claiming that a black dog appeared before her and asked if she wanted to maim the rude old man. And when she whispered, "Maim him," the peddler fell to the ground. Terror-stricken and under pressure from Noel, Alison named her grandmother and 2 family friends. It did not take long for Noel to round up several members of the Device family and herd them into Lancaster Castle. They resided in the lowest levels of what would become known as the Witch's Tower. 20 suspects crammed into a dark, dank hole no more than 12 feet by 17 feet wide. They ranged in age from teenagers to an 80-year-old woman who died before she ever faced trial. After 4 months in that miserable place, the 19 women were led to the courthouse. Noel saw this trial as his chance to make his career and get out of the provinces. However, Noel needed real proof beyond accusations. When the trial began, the courtroom packed with onlookers, and the chamber grew hot and sticky. Over the next 2 days, Noel stood 19 suspects on trial. Alison tearfully repeated her confession, and the court eagerly found her guilty. Her mother, Elizabeth Device, took the stand next. Noel flung wild accusations at her, claiming that she had seen Satan in the form of a black dog, that she created a clay doll of a man to commit murder, and even plotted to blow up Lancaster Castle. The trial should have been deadlocked, but Noel had a secret weapon. He brought out Janet, Elizabeth's 9-year-old daughter. She claimed that her mother practiced the dark arts, which prompted Elizabeth to explode in an uncontrollable rage. Unfazed by her mother's explosion, Janet freely named other members of her own family in the coven. Did Janet enjoy being the center of attention? Could she have resented harsh treatment from her mother? Did Noel simply manipulate a child into helping him destroy her entire family? We will never know. Ironically, under English law, the testimony of a child would not be accepted. However, King James endorsed the testimony of children in his book Demonology, which allowed Noel to use Janet to his advantage. In the end, 10 members of the Device family went to the gallows. Executioners made the drop for the hanging short, so the victims slowly strangled to death over 8 to 10 minutes. Janet Device herself would be accused of witchcraft 22 years later and die in prison. While carried out in his name, the Pendle witch trials were everything that King James wanted to avoid. When he wrote Demonology, he hoped to correct the hysteria of earlier trials and make proceedings based on scripture, evidence, and sworn testimony. Yet the very elastic and subjective nature of witchery made it possible for the ruthless and ambitious to twist the law, to twist King James' words, and finally twist the necks of the accused. Upon King James' death in 1625, his son King Charles I raised the evidence standards for witch trials and banned the use of torture. This all but ended the witch trials in Britain until the English Civil War almost 20 years later. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you found it informative. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.